Trading Time with your host, John Rousseau.
My guest today on Trading Time is just a fabulous, hard-working guy. He is a master builder. He's a building official. I first interfaced with him while building a house in the district of Summerland many years ago, and we've been in touch, and he's been a part of many really in-depth conversations over the years, and just a real soundboard for ideas. I think he's got a lot of great insights into our industry, our building industry, and I always welcome his perspective. To Trading Time today, Vern Sopow. I'm sure you've run into this before, but there are certain things that are just like nobody's job.
Yep.
Right? And you're just like, who do I talk to about this?
Yep.
And we're just like, well,
all over the place.
We don't know who to talk to.
All over the place. It didn't used to be like that. You know, like you actually got fairly good service when you went to an authority back in the olden days, back when I first started in construction. So this is all sort of coming from budgetary restraint and the entire move towards taking everything that an authority or the local government does and put it into general revenue versus taking revenues, as an example, from building permits or from the works and utilities, permits that they give for street permits and all that, and putting them back into the department. They go into general revenue. And
then each department gets their own budget.
Yes.
In April.
That they have to justify.
Right.
So
instead of a department standing on its own 2 feet, generating its own revenue, taking care of its own people.
Yeah. And so it all goes to general revenue. And one of the problems with that is that it's part of the reason why building permits have become so expensive, because most jurisdictions now see it as a real cash cow. They make a revenue stream from building permits. When I first started in the industry, most places, they were happy to break even. And they actually saw the entire process of doing building inspections and regulating the construction of buildings as a service to the community. So in other words, they weren't even afraid to run a deficit as the building department, because they felt like if they had really good buildings, it was better for the community.
It was more of a humanities project.
Well, it was really at the end of the day. And then it just started to really spiral out of control when, the small communities started to try and keep pace with the bigger communities with respect to the value of building permits and the services that they were going to provide. And then all of a sudden, when the cost of construction started to go really high, like when it started to cost so much money for the materials to build a home, as an example, obviously that reflected in the value of the building permit because they're based on construction value. Right. And so now the numbers for building permit income to a city were becoming astronomical, really big numbers. And so that started that whole issue of, what do we do with all this extra money? The building department doesn't need the extra money.
Right.
So now put it into general revenue and then give the building department. And this is part of the reason why, there's a gap and there was a lack of education, and because there was no budget in the building department might make whatever they make on the building permits in a year, but it didn't reflect in their portion of the budget. So. Right. So getting, backup inspectors or getting training or getting mentoring for building officials, it wasn't a priority.
So that it seems like it's almost there isn't equal representation for the building department, even though they're bringing in this massive amount of revenue.
100%.
They don't have the ability to then improve the actual service, which by default you would think that would potentially improve the speed at which building permits would be deployed.
Well, this is the point. If you were actually taking the money that was generated from the building permits within a local government and you put it towards staff, even flex staff, as there were surges in permit applications, you would be able to bring people in on a short-term basis and manage that. But because because the building department gets the specific budget that they get at the beginning of the year,
Yeah.
their fiscal responsibility says that's what they've got and they can't spend anymore. So the interesting part is, and I mean, all local governments are faced with the problems associated with, lack of revenue. And I mean, Summerland's a great example of the consummate complaint about the condition of the roads.
Right.
And so, you look at when they do a 1% tax increase, property tax increase in Summerland, that only generates $120,000.
No.
Yeah.
That's it?
That's it. So what do you do with a $120,000 increase in a year?
Pay an intern? Pay one intern?
Yeah. And it's really funny because, you have people that are throwing themselves in front of cars because a local government wants to raise taxes by 5 or 6% or something like that. End of the day, I think the reason that you're starting to see the government ask for more and more in property taxes because they know people are going to complain anyway, so they may as well.
Right, go for it.
They may as well go for it.
Yeah, right.
Right. So you look at Osoyoos, what happened? They're one of the first ones that's faced the stark reality of this entire issue with budgeting and shortfalls and aging infrastructure. Summerland's another one. Peachland's another one. Well, all of them are. Penticton has water main breaks every year, like literally in the 10s and 20s of water main breaks every year.
Wow.
And that's all due to aging infrastructure. Our electrical infrastructure is aging, the water, all the stuff, the sewer too, and that's another one. Sewer is a real problem. I mean, we've got a state-of-the-art sort of sewage treatment plant in Summerland, but there's lots of places that are still, it's still old school stuff going on. And it's becoming harder and harder for the local governments to operate that way. Environmental groups and, all the, and
Yes.
the other part of it too is these type of things, the social media spotlight, where 20 years ago, it took a long time to find out somebody did something wrong. But
Right.
today, there's John Rousseau with his video camera and he's filming it while it's going wrong. And so,
Right.
it's a totally different environment that we're all working within.
News now.
You're 100%
Bad news right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And good news doesn't make it. We all know that. I mean, it's trite, but it's true. But I feel in a way that that if the local governments truly wanted to provide better service, it's strictly a matter of apportioning more of the money that comes in from the revenue that's generated from building permits back into that department. And they don't. And that's a top-down thing. That's a senior management thing. And most senior management teams, they don't understand. And they don't, to be honest with you, they only care once people are really mad.
Yes.
Once it takes 6 months to get your building permit, and you start to make noise about it, and you go to the local paper and you do what you do, then they'll start to do things. But
Well, I mean, I talked to a contractor then, and he was running into the same issue that you just pointed to. He's like, well, how long for the permit? And they're like, oh, well, that's going to be like probably 2-3 months. Mm-hmm. And he's like, how much is the fine for starting my building without a permit? And she's like, oh, it's going to be $300. Well, can you just apply that to the bill today? Yeah. Because, I mean, 3 months from now, there's going to be 2 feet of snow on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, that's another part of it too, is that we deal with different environmental issues than, the province of British Columbia is located in the Lower Mainland.
That's right.
Full stop. It just is. And so 365 days a year, you can do whatever you want on the Lower Mainland, for the most part. But in the Okanagan Valley and in Kamloops and Prince George, and even in some of the bigger, Kelowna, some of the bigger centers towards the interior of the province, it isn't like that.
No.
You can't finish a building in the middle of winter. You can't stucco. It's hard to put siding on. It's hard to do all the things that you'd like to do based on the weather that you face. And you know, so you end up with people that are in a situation where they're looking for occupancy on a building, and most, you know, to be fair, most authorities do make provisions for that. They'll do an occupancy permit once you've got all life safety things in, and, you know, you have a working kitchen, working yada yada, and so if the outside of the building's not finished, but, you know, there's a cost associated with that, both for the builder and for the local government, because what do you do if a person doesn't finish it then?
Yeah, well, the municipality doesn't own it, I guess. I
No.
guess that's on the owner.
Right,
Which when we read the very last paragraph on any sort of document from any of these municipalities, it says the final responsibility for all of this is on the homeowner.
Yes.
So, you know, we go through all these checks and balances to make sure that everybody's doing everything properly. We hire the engineers, we hire whoever else we need to, specialists. At the end of the day, it's on us anyhow.
For sure. The problem with a partly finished building is that the people within the neighborhood don't like that.
No.
And so then,
Yeah, that's right.
you know, they make their feelings known to council, and council reacts to the public. They're a political body, and so they're driven politically. And another interesting thing about local government that a lot of people don't realize is that the only employee of the city that mayor and council really have direct control over is the chief administrative officer, or chief
CAO?
executive officer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're not supposed to interact with the rest of staff, not even senior management, to be honest with you. So they would hire the CAO, who would then hire senior management, who would then hire all the rest of the employees. And that's the chain of command that's supposed to be followed.
Right.
And so, you know what, you end up with this thing where if your local government is transitory, in other words, if they don't make more than one term in office and there's a change, all of a sudden you have potentially a change in your core senior management team.
Yes.
And every time that happens, the new person comes in and wants to make big changes because they know a better way of doing things. And I've been through that scenario many times in my career, especially even locally here with the District of Summerland. We went through a period of time where we had a number of chief administrative officers in a very short period of time. And it's an untenable situation to actually try and work in, especially maybe for, you know, some of the departments aren't really affected overly by it, but we, you know, as contractors, as you know, because you deal with most of the local authorities, you're looking for something from them all the time. That's what your job is. You're coming in and you're saying, hey, look, I need this and I need that. I need you to come and look at these and all these different things. And so when you have a new person that comes in and they don't understand or care what the person did previously, it's the same too when you have a building official retire. If you haven't provided for succession,
Yes.
it's problematic. It will be problematic. And that goes back again to the budgeting thing that we were talking about. You know, most authorities know 2 to 3 years out when a guy's ready to retire, as an example, or if there's problems and he's likely to quit. So do they plan for succession? Most of them don't.
Yeah.
And so then what you're doing is you're scrambling to get people to cover. So they typically wait until the person retires, and then all of a sudden now the wait starts to, you know, happen again, and they're scrambling to get people to come in, and they're, you know, usually they're going after retired people, retired building officials that want to, you know, still do some part-time work. And again, that's problematic because you're bringing a bunch of old school ideas into where you're dealing with people like you that you know, look at construction from a different perspective.
Right.
You know, you're looking more towards technology and how you can use it, and old school building officials and old school contractors aren't necessarily like that. They've done things like they have for 50 years, and so that's the way they want to continue doing them. So the whole chase of technology is a problem when you bring back older building officials, because, you know, they're not They're not up on a bunch of the things that you want to do as a contractor.
Yes.
And so you end up with conflict, and it's really not either party's fault. It's not the contractor's fault. And it's certainly not the building official's fault, because all he's doing is trying to help out and cover, but
Right.
there become lots of conflicts over it. And this is, again, it's called succession planning, and I'm not sure why it's avoided so much. It takes 3 years, even if you were to find a building official that was very experienced. So, for many years, the Okanagan poached from the coast. They would bring an official in from one of the bigger centers on the coast, because they could move from there to here,
Yep.
sell their house there, have a bunch of change left over,
Yep.
live in the Okanagan. And it's less like that, obviously, now. But we don't, that advantage isn't there anymore. And so now you actually have to physically look at bringing somebody with less experience in early enough that they can take advantage of the mentoring provided by the
Whoever it is that's going out.
Right.
Right.
But you need to know that, right? And you need to plan for it.
Yes.
So if you know 3 years out that a guy's going to retire, you should be hiring. And you know what? That means that there's going to be 2 people doing the same job.
Yeah, you're grooming somebody, you're mentoring
And
them.
that's
Yeah.
the only way that it can be done. But nobody's budgeting to do that. And again, there's tons of revenue that local building departments in Summerland and Peachland and West Kelowna and Osoyoos, there's lots of money now in revenue in building permits. And they could, but they're just choosing to put it into general revenue. And so it doesn't make its way down to the department that it needs to go into. And as a result, we have these big gaps of intellect, if you want to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at the way that it was originally intended, the way that the system was originally intended in the olden days, we didn't care if we generated revenue within what we cared about was whether the buildings met the building code. And, then you get into this whole debate too about, we had a discussion on site about alternative solutions,
Yes.
and about new technology. And this brings into the whole mix another part of it. And the reason that Building Code Standards Branch and the province are trying to move in the direction of using professionals is because right now, the building code can't react to technology fast enough. The building code's produced every 4 or 5 years.
Okay, so let's just back up a sec, because we just got a new building code.
Yep.
So it's 2024. The last building code came out in 2018, I believe.
Yep.
Right? So that's 6 years in between versions.
Mm-hmm.
And just take a look at the advancements in like envelope material or HVAC technology or thin triple glazing systems. So to your point,
Yes.
to have these professionals signing off on these assemblies that may have been tested and in use in Europe for 25 years before they're coming over into this North American market. We've got like 25 years of data of this product being used somewhere. Mm-hmm. You're saying that the building code can't react quickly enough to the technology that we're importing in the form of these complex envelope systems.
That's exactly right. And so the provision was made two cycles ago in the building code to adopt what was called alternative solutions. And the reason that alternative solutions were brought in was because if professionals continue to build to, Part 3 is not considered prescriptive, but it is prescriptive because it allows you to only do what's in Part 3. So that's still being prescriptive from my perspective. So if you're building a building to Part 3 from a prescriptive perspective, you're building the worst building you can legally build.
So just to clarify again for people that don't know what that means, a prescriptive building is the building that hits the least amount of requirements in order to satiate the BC building code.
That's right.
That's a prescriptive building. A performance building is
Or
something...
objective. So there's prescriptive and objective.
Oh, they've changed it from
No,
objective
but
to
I'm just saying.
performance?
So
Okay.
the idea would be the idea that we're trying to move towards is an objective-based building code where, and that was why alternative solutions were brought in. So instead of being prescriptive, instead of saying, okay, architect, you need to do the fire separations like this, 2 layers of 5/8 type X, yada, 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 all that stuff.
R20 walls, R60
all that.
ceiling.
Instead, architect, we need you to make sure that this room is protected from the rest of the building for 2 hours. Don't care how you get there.
Yeah, right.
Right? So you could do it via sprinklers or do it via a combination of sprinklers. And, everybody's looking at these rated glass, which is a new technology coming in. And, I don't know, I'm still sort of up in the air on the whole thing, but
at $200 a foot, you're up in the air on that?
But you see, like, that's an example, right? Yeah. As soon as we start to use and take advantage of the fact that Part 3 is supposed to be an objective-based code, and so they brought in alternative solutions to facilitate that objectivity. It's not saying, John, the architect, you need to put 6 nails in a corner stud to hold it together. It's you need to build a corner stud. And so however the best way for you to do it is,
right,
as long as you document and show us that it's doing the same thing that it would have been done. If there's something new that comes from Europe that does it twice as good, and you can show it to us, go for it.
Go for it. And that's up to you to put your letters of assurance against whatever research and information discernment that you've done. Right?
Well, for sure.
That puts it back to the architect. They're just like, okay, well, I'm gonna get engaged by my client to do all of this reading, check my facts. I'll sign off on that.
100%.
Right?
The other part of it is that you don't need to be a professional to do an alternative solution. You have to be competent. So
hold on. Whoa.
Yeah. It's so when you read the entire portion about alternative solutions, it doesn't say anywhere that it has to be a professional that submits an alternative solution.
No.
So there's a provision within that for people that aren't professionals, but are highly competent technically. Can you imagine? Notwithstanding that, if it's a complex building and there's a set of professionals involved, as like with respect to an architect being a coordinating registered professional, which is a whole nother discussion. Someday we should have a discussion about the responsibilities of the coordinating professional, because this is really poorly dealt with even within the professional ranks.
Right.
But if the building has a coordinating registered professional and is done under Part 3 and done on using professionals, even though technically the person that writes the alternative solution doesn't have to be a professional, that coordinating registered professional or the architect or whoever the person is that is being written, they'll have to still have
to accept their findings,
yes,
and apply them to their file.
That's
yes.
right. And then that will be passed to the authority having jurisdiction, the building official, who will then accept it. They don't approve it.
Right.
So the building official won't approve an alternative solution. They'll accept an alternative solution. And then when they take it in, if they have a red flag for any specific reason, there's provisions for there to be third-party reviews and all kinds of different things, or getting additional opinions and all the rest of that kind of stuff. But there's a bunch of things within the process that aren't really managed properly. And that's one of the reasons why there hasn't been the rush that everybody had hoped to see. We all even from myself, my own perspective, when they started to going towards alternative solutions, I thought this was going to really be like a real panacea for British Columbia.
Yes.
To be able to react to technological changes. But it's not the building official's responsibility to go out and promote alternative solutions.
Right.
It's people, it's developers, contractors, professionals that want to use something that doesn't fall within the prescriptive terms of Part 3. It's up to them to bring that alternative solution to the building official. And until we start doing it, you know yourself. So as an example, if you're a building inspector, John Rousseau,
yes,
sitting there across the desk, and somebody comes in with 300 pages of stuff and says, here you go, John, here's an alternative solution I want to do for this HVAC system.
Yeah.
How thrilled are you going to be about it?
Well, it depends on my relationship with the contractor, but yeah, if I had to review all of those, I would probably struggle to find the time to do that.
Right.
Already, if I'm already struggling from a manpower
right?
perspective.
And that's the point. But the other part of it is that it's daunting. It's something you haven't done before. And building officials are not the most creative of people as a group. And so when we get something that comes across the desk that's different, it's like that thing about baboons being mad about changes in their cages, right?
Yes.
So right away you're suspicious and you don't want to deal with this thing, and so you procrastinate and you look at it and you, oh man, what am I going to do with this thing? I don't want to sign this off.
Yeah, that's right.
But if during the tenure you had as a building official, every week you were getting an alternative solution, right? After a couple of weeks, after a couple of times, you'd be going, oh yeah, flip, 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 flip. This looks reasonable. Sign, go, sign, go, sign, go. Or no, this is not something that I'm interested in. I'm going to ask for a third party review, right?
Yeah.
But until, every building official starts seeing alternative solutions, they're going to be uncomfortable with them. There's a complaint, there's complaints all the time. Yeah, there's provisions for alternative solutions, but when you send them to the authority, it's like they go into the vortex.
Yeah, they do.
Hole. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Oh, they
right?
do.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I mentioned to you that I have experience with that exact vortex where I put an alternate solution in for an HVAC system to the regional district, and the building officials had never done an alternate solution before.
Yep.
And look at the area that they're serving. They're serving the Naramata Bench. Like, how many $1 million houses are built over there every year? They've never done an alternate alternate solution. It's crazy.
It is. It's not their fault, though. I think it's more it's not, well, not that we're trying to lay blame.
No.
But the point being, alternative solutions need to be used in order for them to be useful. And the professionals aren't, and developers aren't. And so they're still trying to build buildings within the finite confines of Part 3 or Part 9, which is even more prescriptive. Part 9 is considered prescriptive. That's single-family dwelling units.
Yes.
And small commercial. And so within Part 9, they go to the point where they tell you how many nails to put in to a stud and how many nails to put into a sheet of plywood. It tells you the number, how the spacing, and how to build.
You could build it yourself.
You could build it yourself, right? Actually, Part 9 was first designed so that people could build their own houses. But, it's like everything else. It's an evolvement. The intent of Part 9 was square boxes with gable roofs. In the olden days?
Right.
So like in the 60s and 70s?
VA housing?
Yeah, well, yeah. And I grew up in one in Vancouver, 750 square feet. It was built in just post-war. And it was a story with a basement and a gable roof and, 4 walls. I mean, there was hardly any windows, and it was what it was. And, this also speaks to the cost of construction. When you look at the way that Part 9 and single-family dwelling units have morphed over the last 30 or 40 years into things that, it would not be uncommon. I know that even in my time at the District of Summerland, that we had at least 10 buildings that were single-family dwelling units that were so big that they required an architect.
Yes.
So anything beyond 6,400 and change square feet, theoretically, you require professionals on that project. Now, to be honest with you, that it's not a huge deal, because everything in Part 3 that has anything to do with that refers you back to Part 9 anyway. So It's not like you're all of a sudden building a Part 3 building because you're building over 6,000 square feet. But the fact of the matter is, Part 9 was never designed for buildings that big. That's why it's only been recently that they've dealt with things like TJIs and engineered beams and all that, because before everything was dimensional lumber and it was built up, and all the spans that were allowed within the code for a small place, 1,500 square feet on a street in any town with a basement maybe, or slab on grade depending. These were really straightforward, simple buildings.
All the answers were there already.
Everything. You had everything there. You didn't need to go to anybody.
Yeah. And that's why when you mention these products, like the TGIs and everything else coming out, building officials would require a seal on the roof and floor assemblies prior to accepting the plans.
Affirmative.
Because they were outside of that Part 9 scope, which was so cut and dry. Yes.
Yep.
Anyway, how did you get into this industry? Where have you been? What are some of the crazy things you've seen? You want to start at the beginning? How did you start your career? Where did you start your career?
Well, my family has been in construction and ranching for generations, and so it was a natural move for me. And I started working, I think I was 6 years old. I got a canvas apron and a new hammer, and I nailed subfloors down on duplexes that my dad and my uncle were building in Burnaby.
Cool.
And during summer holidays, Easter break and stuff like that. And then stuck with the construction industry, did some little forays into placer gold mining and stuff, which potentially is again sort of a natural sort of evolvement of all this stuff. But
Yeah.
and then I got into construction in a pretty big way and did some of the very first 4-story wood frame fully sprinkled buildings in the city of Vancouver.
Cool.
And I was recruited out of the field by the city of Vancouver to be a building inspector for the city of Vancouver. And then while I was doing that, I stayed with the construction industry. They wanted, 3 or 4 building inspectors that were still current and stuff like that. So as long as we didn't build in Vancouver, we were allowed to continue doing stuff on the side. And so
you were building outside of the city of Vancouver, but you were also a consultant / inspector for them.
yeah.
Interesting.
And then, and so then the reason I kind of did that was because I got married and had kids, and that consistent paycheck and all of the benefits and all that kind of stuff was pretty attractive. And then I moved up here and we started a cow-calf operation and a horse boarding training facility, which is just near you here.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back into construction again. I worked for the regional district for a number of years when I first moved here. Then I worked for the city of West Kelowna, and then the district of Summerland, and then now I work in private industry, doing the same thing, but just for a different driver, for a different level of person that I'm working for right now.
The private sector.
The private sector.
Yeah.
Went to the dark side. Although, some people would think going as a building inspector is going to the dark side. So I don't know. I kind of leave it to that. As I said, I do advocacy work. I have good contacts with numbers of building officials, obviously, throughout the Okanagan Valley, and I help them out, and I do some training and I do some mentoring, and then I also do field reviews and code analysis and alternative solutions, to be
Yeah.
honest with you.
Yeah.
I've written quite a few alternative solutions since I stopped working at the District of Summerland.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you would be one of those well-versed professionals that somebody could call up and engage and say, listen, I'm thinking about doing this. Can I get your eyes on it?
Yep.
Yeah, interesting.
Yep. As I said, if you want to take one thing away from today, would be to encourage the use of alternative solutions. Alternative solutions were really put in place so that we'd have better buildings. That was the reason that they were done. It was so that when that new technology showed up, we didn't have to wait 5 years and a new code cycle to get it into the buildings. We could get it into the buildings right away. Therefore, we would have a better building.
Because a building is just really, when you think about it, it's a collection of well thought out components, right? You got a well thought out footing assembly.
Yep.
And there's a whole bunch of technology that could go into that. I'm seeing like fiberglass rebar. I'm seeing small steel reinforcement pieces now that are acting in there. So you don't need so much steel and all sorts of these different technologies. But there again, like that's happening in the walls. That's
Even the styrofoam blocks.
especially the styrofoam blocks.
Right?
Yes.
Like this is, good, bad, or indifferent. And when they first came out, I wasn't a real fan of them, but I think they definitely have some good uses. And so, and they seem to have stood the test of time. They've been around for 20 years.
Right.
And to be honest with you, one of the very first houses ever built, and probably the province was built in the city of Vancouver out of styrofoam blocks when
The
they were
ICF
first.
stuff.
Yeah, the ICF stuff. So like that's another example of, those blocks are around for a long time until they made it into the code cycle.
Right.
And before that, everybody that wanted to use them had to have a full engineer and,
You had to convince an engineer that this was a good idea.
Exactly that too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the other thing, getting somebody else on board to, oh yeah, I'm behind that idea.
Yeah. Well, this is part of my beef though with professionals is that from my perspective, part of their job in having a stamp and having that ability to put a seal on something is they ought to be chasing technology. They ought to be educating themselves all the time. They're actually supposed to. Just like you do, you go look at trade shows and you go look at on the internet and you find stuff that's, cutting edge and that's the same thing that they ought to be doing. And the idea is when they see that cutting edge component, they figure out how they can use it. Can it be done cost effectively? Is it an improvement? And then they write an alternative solution and they go for it. That's kind of what the whole basis of all of this was.
Professional development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what a novel idea. Eh?
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited. I don't think that there's ever been a better time to be in building. We have the availability of materials from all over the world to work with if we want.
Yep.
There are so many different incredible breathable membranes that we have
Smart
access
membranes.
to. These smart membranes and these envelope tapes and like we were talking about these glazing solutions that we're developing just in our shop. What a great time to be in building.
If you can find people.
So let's talk about that. What are you seeing when you're on these sites? What's the vibe like? What's the morale like on site?
Well, the morale's pretty good. But it's sure interesting to me, coming from a background that I've come from, to see what is available to a big general contractor on a big site.
From a labor perspective?
From a labor perspective. That it's when I think about what some of these guys are getting paid, and this is coming onto a project with no experience. I don't understand how it's, you said it's a great time to be in construction. And I think if you're well set up and you're established and you have a good trade base and you have, a bunch of people that you're used to working with, and, more important than ever, I believe now, looking at what's happened in the last 10 or 15 years, that relationship building is a huge part of being successful as a contractor. I think this constant change of trades, when I watch big companies that do, large scale projects, continually going for lowest bid, I just cringe because, I know from a perspective of what I do for those big companies that it's going to be a problem. Yeah. Because again, it's like I was saying to you earlier about succession planning with respect to building officials. Well, it's no different in the construction industry when you have a one trade group that comes in and they do things a certain way, and then you bring somebody else in, you have the rest of the same trade group with somebody new coming in, and it causes problems on the site. It does all the time. It's a fact of life. It just
Well, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I understand low bid. I understand why people would opt that way, but I've always, from my perspective, when we were building lots of big buildings in Vancouver, we got a core group of people, trades, whether they were HVAC, whether they were electricians or plumbers or roofers or whatever it was. And you know what? They just did it. Every single job. We didn't put things out to tender.
No.
That was the crew that went in and did it.
And if you want to work with us in our group,
Yeah.
this is how much it's going to cost.
This is what it's going to be. Yeah. And so anyway, you know, maybe the environment has changed so radically now that it can't be done that way. I'm not sure, but I see the result on a daily basis going out in the field on big projects and seeing the results of this change of personnel. Let's put it that way, change of trade. Low bid is, to me, is going to damage some companies.
Oh.
It's going to end up costing them more.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But how then do you justify middle bid when, as we've discovered, we don't have the best lending environment right now?
No, I know.
Right?
But you see, like, this goes back to what I said about building relationships. And, you know, I know that personality comes into every factor of life. You know, your personality, my personality, everybody's got their own ability to interact with people on a different level. And I just, you know, it's been my feeling that when you find people that you can work with, you do whatever it takes to keep them.
Right. Wow.
I see a huge turnover within the industry that I'm in now, within professional engineering and architecture. I see lots and lots of turnover.
Like from firm to firm, professionals jumping.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think that's good. It's not good for anybody. It isn't good for. It's not good for the firm that loses the person. The firm that gets it, they've still got an issue with getting that person, you know, functioning within their organization now. That doesn't happen in a week.
No, it doesn't.
You know, when you bring a new building official to an organization, to a local government, for the most part, it takes 2 years. Even if they're an experienced person, to integrate them into the way that the system works there, and to have them figure out where things are, first off, geographically, and then to understand the people, right?
Yeah.
You understand who the John Rousseaus are and who the other guys are, and all of that stuff. The whole time that you're in that position, unless you're, you know, a pretty rare breed that can walk in and basically take control, that it takes 2 years, like it really does, to bring somebody, even if they're experienced.
Right.
To get them 100% right up to speed. So, you know, and it's the same with, I think, within the professional organizations. You know, when you have people jumping ship and going to other companies, and it's strictly, you know, and again, 90% of the time it comes down to money. And you think about the company that the person left from, what would have cost them
to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then should they have kept them? And, you know, now you got this real big debate.
That whole saying where it's like, you know, we can't afford to fire anybody because we can't afford to hire anybody.
I see poaching in the big construction companies on a daily basis as well, for, you know, carpenters and laborers and stuff like that. You know, they'll go to the next project for $5 an hour or whatever it is. And I get it that, you know, that's $5 an hour is $5 an hour. But you have to sort of, I think there has to be sort of you know, some kind of a median reached where you keep a person that provides a service because not only are they good at what they do, but you get along with them. Because the next person you may not get along with. So how many people is it going to take until you find somebody else that you can get along with that way, right? And anyway, it's that.
The devil you know.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah.
It's a cutthroat industry right now, for sure.
One of the things that I realized, this was an epiphany I had a couple weeks ago. It was like, and I think that this kind of speaks to what you're proposing, is like, you and I could get whatever it is that we needed to get done today, done. I know I could look at you and go, Vern, you and I, damn it, we got to go do whatever we got to do, and it'd be done. But that's not what matters. What matters is if we want to do that again tomorrow,
Right.
together.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when you look at every situation that you're in with the professionals you're interfacing with, you have to look at it through that lens.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's tough. I mean, you've been in a position where you're building a house right now where you have several professionals involved that you typically wouldn't see involved in the construction of a single family dwelling unit.
Ever. Yeah.
And so it's even, and so these are areas like civil engineering is not something you would typically encounter with the construction of a single family dwelling unit. And so you've never interfaced with a civil engineer before, and you don't know.
You're right.
They look at things from a completely different perspective because they don't ever deal on property. They typically, they're not even addressed in the building code under letters of assurance. There's no civil engineering letters of assurance. Civil engineers work from the property line on municipal land or on community land. So they typically don't get involved getting, drainage and stuff around a house or something. So you're in a unique situation where you've had that requirement, and now you're starting to get an understanding on how their thought process works.
Right.
And so, you're going to end up with several different types of professionals on that project once it's all said and done, geotechs and structural and who knows what else by the end of the day. But that's not a typical build.
No.
So you are in a position right now where theoretically you've hired them all from the same company, and so there should have been economies of scale from that. There should have been. The idea behind that is that there's communication between those three disciplines,
Yes.
and it's not like the civil is phoning a structural guy from another company
Yeah.
and waiting for the phone call back.
Right. They're under the same umbrella. They're getting paid by the same people.
Exactly. Theoretically, there should be, much higher level of performance from that kind of
Continuity,
scenario.
response time,
100%, yeah.
diligence in getting answers quickly. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we've had a good experience working with the professionals we've engaged. Obviously, you're in a situation where, as you've been in, I'm sure, in your life, where everybody was like, is that my department? Am I saying yes to this? Is that something that I have to approve and be on the line for? And
It's no different for them. Civil engineers are uncomfortable with dealing with houses because they don't.
right.
They might be part of servicing a subdivision,
Yeah.
right? But they typically stop at property line or whatever, and so there's other professionals that take over once it goes to that section. But the point in all of this is you make decisions on a daily basis about the people that you interact with, and until our industry, in general terms, and it doesn't matter whether it's the contractors or the professionals or the support people or anything like that, there will be a point where that median is reached, or and then you'll end up with maybe, hopefully it works out where we get a bit of a break on the interest rates from the feds who want houses but then don't provide the environment to facilitate it. And if we have, companies that have got good employees and have the professionals they've stopped poaching each other and jumping ship and going to other companies,
Right.
Maybe we can have a period of time where we can have non-turbulent construction, but right now it's pretty turbulent.
I just lost a bid recently for a big window and door package, which I'm a little upset about because of the amount of time that we took with the clients and everything else. We ended up losing that contract to an Austrian company. And chances are the Austrian company is buying the wood from British Columbia shipping it in a shipping container to their factory, processing it, then shipping it back to us at a lower price than what we can produce it for here. But the real problem with that is that you can't forever ship hundreds of thousands of dollars per project into out of the country, right? And expect that the workshops of Asia and Europe are going to give you all of the stuff that you need to do it, because you can do that for a little while, but I think that we're starting to see the fruit of that in the sense that, okay, so now you've sent the signal to all these people, they can close up their window and door manufacturing facilities. We don't need you anymore. But then who's installing, who's maintaining the infrastructure once it's installed? Because you know that you don't build a building and there's no maintenance, right? And I think that we're starting to see that. How do we pull out of that? How do we get consumers to understand that you might not pay, you don't want to buy the low bid. The low bid's offshore. You want to keep that money on Canadian soil so that you have the opportunity to earn it back. You're sending the signal to your compatriots in the community that we want you here. How do we change that thinking?
Well, the one thing that you've got going for you, specifically you, is that you are after a different market than 90% of the people that do windows and doors. You're after a high-end market, and that high-end market will always exist, even when the times are, like when there's a recession or downturns in the construction economy. So there's always people with money, and there's always people that are willing to spend money.
Right.
But with respect to whether it's coming from offshore or not, and this has been the same argument that's been used since I was young enough to start understanding the economics of construction, which is, again, that low bid thing where, you've been framing houses for a developer for a long time, but somebody comes in for $5 a square foot less, and so then you don't get it. And so then now you have to drop your price to match that.
It's a race
And
to
so
the
you
bottom.
the race to the bottom syndrome.
Yeah.
And I would have thought that based on on people in general terms, understanding more with the world being available to you at that computer monitor, that we would be past this low bid thing. But we talked about the low bid earlier, right?
Yeah.
And I just don't agree with low bid. I don't think that people get the best value for low bid. I've never seen low bid be the best value. Let's put it that way.
I've never seen
Low bid be the best value. It's always cost more in time, more in materials, more in, again, it's that
Mistakes,
whole thing. Yeah, mistake.
potentially.
Well, yeah, but it's that whole thing that we were talking about, relationship building. You get the low bid that comes in, and they do something differently than the other guy did, and so now it disrupts everybody else in the project too. Right. The tentacles are big for low bids. Like they go in a lot of different directions, and they're very strong. And so, there's nothing that you can do to, the local governments are really the ones that are the most guilty of it. So, District of Summerland or City of Kelowna or City of Penticton, a lot of them have got it written into their internal documents that they must take low bid.
They must take the low bid. Yep.
They have to justify not taking low bid. And the experiences that they've had taking low bid are not always pleasant.
Right.
There's been many, many debacles that have resulted from low bid. But you know what? We're responsible to the taxpayer. It comes all the way back to the very first thing we talked about, which is the politicians. And from my perspective, the worst level of politics, the hardest level of politics is local government. I take my hat off to anybody that's willing to throw their hat into the ring and be a mayor or councillor in a small community. I think that is the most uncompelling thing I would ever think about doing. And I congratulate, it's really funny, I like to keep track of the mayor and council in Summerland. I don't live in Summerland, but I know all the councilors and the mayor. And so when there's an election, I'll go out and I'll congratulate the people that ran that didn't win. And they'll say, well, why congratulate me? I didn't win. But if they didn't throw their hat in the ring, it wouldn't be a democratic process. Mm-hmm. It would have just been acclamation, and who needs that? You don't need it, right? And so what you end up with in a small place like Summerland is you end up with the agenda of the person that gets that position as mayor or councillor. Right. And so you're stuck with that agenda for a period of time. There's a lot of arguments to be made even at a provincial level. The new building code, I don't know how much you've taken time to go through the new building code, but for large scale developments, there were several contentious things added to the building code. One of them was deferred for a year because it was so contentious. But the development community sees it as mixed signals coming from a government that says we want affordable housing, but we're going to make it much more expensive to build that affordable housing. Right. It doesn't, I don't understand how anybody can look at a system where that you continually make it more expensive to do something, but you want it to be inexpensive for people to buy it.
To do it.
Yeah.
You make it more expensive to do it, and you expect it to be less expensive to do it.
Yeah, and it doesn't, like those numbers, it's just every time I've looked at the way that the numbers work, it can't.
No.
It doesn't matter what you do, right? So, yeah, wow. This whole thing, I know for a fact that there's several big developments, and I'm talking really big developments that are on the side right now for the South Okanagan.
Think of what the economic consequences of that are for the region.
And it's not even just that it's like 6 months, but because this could be a 3 or 4 year cycle until they're ready to do it. Even if the interest rates came down right now, right? You still got to deal with the shortage of labor. You still got to deal with all those things, and then on top of that, you get partway through the project, and then they raise the interest rate again.
Right.
Your carrying costs and interim loans and all the stuff that there's very few companies that are capitalized to do the entire project internally, right?
Well, yeah.
You can't, and plus you shouldn't.
Right.
Right? That's not fair to your shareholders. I mean, you're supposed to leverage, so, but I can tell you right now, I know that we're in a position right now where we have projects that have been shelved for sure at this point. So I don't know how we're going to achieve, whether it's 1 million or 5 million houses federally by 2030, whatever the number is. It's a big number.
It's a huge number.
Like a lot of people, that's the problem with numbers like 1 million or 5 million. You say it and it's really easy to say, but you've built a house.
Yeah, you're like, how many of those do we need to build?
Yeah, 1 million. Like even if it was 1 million.
Yeah, so the shortfall projection I think is 1.3 million shortfall on top of what we build every year.
Oh yeah. Oh, so that's where the five.
That's what it is. So it's 5 million houses total that we need to build.
Right.
And we're on pace to only build 3.5.
Right.
Or whatever.
So we're
short that 1.5 million houses.
Yeah.
And so again, then the argument, and again, this goes back to what did you say? Policy is written in Vancouver for the province. Mm-hmm. And they assume that the building season is 364 days of the year. You're going to get a bit of rain, but no big deal. You can work in that, right? Whereas up here, I mean, I don't know if you remember what it was like. God, what was that? Two springs ago, it rained 90 days in a row.
Yeah.
And so you come out of a winter where you have 3 feet of snow on the ground to it raining violently how do you put a framing package out? How do you how do you put peel and stick on a roof? Like,
How do you maintain 19% moisture content in your framing material?
in your framing assembly before you start vapor barriering and putting your finishing materials on. Like,
And that's an interesting thing. Like, I don't know where you are in this whole, but pre-manufactured or component built, there's a real push to that again now. I've been at a couple of conferences, Building Officials Association conferences. The last 2 years in a row, there's been a big push towards creating factories that pre-build, pre-construct. So in a very controlled environment. I don't know if you remember or you heard of our 2000 program many, many years ago. It was kind of, but a much more high-tech version of that. And it's something that they're starting to see on the coast, where there's big warehouses being turned into mechanized wall fabrication things.
Yes.
I've got a feeling that you're going to see much more of that down the road, and it's something that would really benefit places like the Okanagan that have such huge swings in temperature and environmental conditions, where you pre-construct a building inside and then crane it into place, and it's basically there in the envelope up within 3 or 4 weeks or something like that. And I think that's something that we need to work towards, and it can be done for larger buildings too, like 6-story wood frame buildings.
well, of course,
or modular, or so there's a bunch of different ways that we can mitigate all these things. But public acceptance is one thing. Like, in other words, like if you do a modular 6-story building, there was a BC Housing did one on Skaha Drive in Penticton last year. So that was a whole pile of boxes stacked on top of each other as a 6-story building.
Yeah.
And didn't look like any different than any other 6-story building you're ever going to see, but it was just delivered on site in big trucks and put up in boxes.
Sequence stacked trucks and cranes on site, and there you go.
Yep, and it was done. It was done in 6 months.
So let me get this straight. You're proposing that instead of let's just swap the building out for an automobile. Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen an automobile be manufactured in the middle of a field? No, they're in temperature regulated, climate controlled buildings where humidity is regulated, and then they come out the other end and they're done. Yeah. And people buy them and they love them.
Yeah,
we could do that with housing, is what you're proposing?
Well, I think it's the only way. It's the only way that we're going to get a product in certain areas. Well, even on the Lower Mainland, because they tend to have much more rain than we do, where you can actually control the material, the moisture content within the material, and you don't end up with the degradation that you do get. So when you stick frame a building like a 6-story building, and it's been exposed to the elements for a year, there's a significant amount of UV degradation, water degradation that happens to the materials, and they don't get better. So that's built into the mix, right? And so,
and they shrink and they warp and they
move.
Yeah.
And so, but the other part of it is, when engineers design buildings, they have to factor that part of it in. So they over design. Right. So in other words, they're gonna work into the balance 10% degradation factor. So we have to oversize by 10% to make up for that.
2x6 to 2x8 wall, and there you go.
And so, what does that do to the cost of the building?
So you're saying that we could build. I mean, and again, when you take all the environmental concerns into construction, coupled with our skilled labor shortage that you've outlined. I have an argument that is we need to take the skilled labor that we have, put it in a climate-controlled facility, and augment it with as much robotic and automation
100%.
technology as possible.
Yep.
That's the only way that we're going to get even relatively close to some of these housing targets that have been proposed.
How come you don't build your windows outside?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we need to take the principles that we have applied to mass manufacturing in other sectors and apply it to the building sector. We have to do that in this country.
And you know what? So whether you're a fan of computers or not, and I've seen the software work, and it's amazing. And these computer programs operate just like you know what a wood CNC lathe does, or different. So at a level that's bigger, when they're constructing exterior walls, as an example, these computers run the automated machines and put all the holes in place for all the plumbing and the electrical. Everything is done when it's laying on the ground. And so then when it stands up, the electricians just come through and pull wire, and the plumbers come through and put their stuff. There's no more drilling on site and cutting beams and doing all the stuff that they want to do. It's all figured out and done to the most, advantageous layouts.
Yes.
And I just think that it's the way that we've got to go.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
And on that, Vern, I think we should probably leave it there.
Okay.
That was a really great discussion. We've touched on a lot of really important subjects, and I appreciate your input and your mentorship over the years. I know that you've mentored a lot of people in the industry locally. That's super important and something that's not touched on enough. And I always enjoy our conversations. So thank you very much, man.
Me too. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Vern.